Get your hands off me. Sophia Bennett said it once quietly to the man blocking the exit of her father's empty apartment, the man her father owed everything to. Adrian Moretti didn't move. He just looked at her the way people look at something they've already decided to keep. If this story already has you hooked, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Sophia Bennett had spent the better part of 3 years becoming invisible, and she had gotten very good at it. She wore plain clothes. She kept her head down on the subway. She answered to a name that wasn't quite hers. Not a lie exactly. Just a version of the truth she'd edited down until it fit inside a life small enough to hide in. She worked long hours at a medical research lab on the east side of Manhattan, and when people asked about her family, she smiled and changed the subject, and they let her, because most people are too wrapped up in their own trouble to press very hard on someone else's. She had a plan. She had always had a plan. The plan was to stay quiet, stay careful, and survive long enough to fix what her father had broken before he disappeared. Then the Morettis found her. It didn't happen the way she'd imagined it would. She'd imagined men in black cars. She'd imagined being grabbed off a sidewalk, a hand over her mouth, a blindfold, something out of a movie. Instead, it happened on a Tuesday morning in the lab's break room, when a woman she'd never seen before sat down across from her with a cup of coffee she hadn't purchased and said, "Sophia Bennett, or do you prefer your mother's maiden name? That's what you've been using on your lease." Sophia set down her yogurt spoon. She made herself breathe. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said. The woman smiled. She was around 50, well-dressed, and had the patient, unhurried expression of someone who had been doing this kind of thing for a very long time. "My name is Carla," she said. "I work for Adrian Moretti. He'd like to have dinner with you this evening. Not a request, of course, though he asked me to make it sound like one." Sophia looked at the door. She calculated the distance. She thought about the envelope hidden in the floorboard beneath her bed, the one that held every piece of evidence she had spent 3 years collecting. The one that could either save her or get her killed, depending entirely on who found it first. "Tell Mr. Moretti," she said, "that I'm busy." Carla picked up her coffee cup and stood. "He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that your sister Elena is having a very nice morning so far. Lovely girl. Takes the same bus every day at 7:45. He hopes she continues to have safe commutes." Sophia went to dinner. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, which meant the prices were obscene, which meant the people eating there could afford to be obscene. Every table was occupied by men who wore their money like armor, and women who had learned to wear their silence the same way. Sophia walked through it feeling like a person who had accidentally wandered into a country where she didn't speak the language and didn't know the customs and couldn't find the exit. Adrian Moretti stood when she arrived at the table. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected him to sit back and watch her come to him the way powerful men always watched people come to them, with that particular brand of stillness that was really just arrogance resting. Instead, he stood, and he pulled out her chair, and he waited until she sat before he did. I was younger than she'd pictured. That surprised her too. She'd built him up in her mind into something enormous and ancient and made of stone, and the man across from her was 37 years old, with dark circles under his eyes, and a jaw that needed a shave, and hands that looked like they'd done real work once before the Empire started doing it for him. He was handsome in the way that storms are sometimes beautiful. You could appreciate it completely, and still understand that it was going to destroy something. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You threatened my sister. I reminded you that she exists." He lifted his water glass. "There's a difference." "There really isn't." He looked at her for a moment, and she got the impression that she had surprised him. She filed that away. "You could learn a great deal about a man by watching what surprised him. Your father," he said, "owes my family a significant debt. Not just money, though there's plenty of that. Information. He took something from us before he vanished, and that something has been causing problems for 3 years. He set down his glass. "I need a solution." "My father's been missing for 3 years, Sophia said. "I don't have whatever he took." "I know." He said it simply, without drama, which was somehow worse. "But you know where it is, or you know enough that you could figure it out. and I need someone I can trust to be close to that information without running to my enemies with it." She waited. "I'm proposing a marriage," he said. 6 months, a contract. After 6 months, you walk away with enough money to disappear completely and give yourself and your sister a real life, and I get the stability I need while I resolve the situation with your father's debt." Sophia stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that drew glances from nearby tables. "You're serious?" "I don't make jokes that involve this much money." "Marriage," she said. "You want to get married. I want to get through the next 6 months without a war breaking out inside my organization. A wife provides a certain kind of cover, a certain kind of message. There are men inside my family who are testing boundaries right now, and a settled, focused Adrian Moretti is a more dangerous Adrian Moretti." He watched her face. "You would have my full protection. Your sister would be safe. Your father's debt would be settled and removed from the books. And at the end of 6 months you walk away. Just like that. Just like that. You'll leave after the wedding," he said. "When this is over, you'll be free." Sophia looked at the table. She thought about Elena, who took the 7:45 bus every morning, and thought her older sister worked in research and had no idea what their father had done. She thought about the envelope under the floorboard. She thought about the 3 years she had spent being invisible, and how exhausting it had been, and how she was no closer to solving any of it than she had been at the start. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Then I find another way to handle this situation, and your family finds themselves inside a problem they're not equipped to handle." He said it without cruelty, which was almost the worst part. "I'm not threatening you, Sophia. I'm being honest with you, which is more than most people in my position would bother to do." She looked up at him. "Why are you telling me the truth?" He seemed to consider the question seriously. "Because you're going to find out eventually, and I'd rather you find out from me while we're still negotiating." She held his gaze for a long moment. 6 months, she said. 6 months. And Elena stays completely out of this. She never knows, she never gets involved, she never even hears your name. Agreed. And if at any point I feel that I or someone I love is in danger because of this arrangement, then you come to me directly, not to my men, not to anyone else. You come to me, and I handle it. Sophia looked at him for another few seconds. Then she picked up the menu. "Order me something," she said. "I can't read French." The wedding happened 11 days later. It was small by Moretti standards, which still meant 60 people in a private venue with more flowers than Sophia had seen in her entire life, combined a dress that had clearly cost someone a significant amount of money, and a priest who shook Adrian's hand the way employees shake the hand of someone who writes their paycheck. Sophia's side of the room held Elena, who had been told only that Sophia was marrying a successful businessman she'd been seeing privately for several months, and who had spent the entire morning alternating between crying happy tears and saying, "I can't believe you didn't tell me," with escalating intensity. Sophia had said, "I know I'm sorry," approximately 40 times, and had meant it each time in ways Elena couldn't understand. She didn't tremble during the ceremony. She had decided she wouldn't. She stood straight, and she said the right words at the right moments, and she put the ring on her finger, and she looked at Adrian Moretti, and she thought 6 months. Just 6 months, and then this is over, and we both go back to whatever passes for our real lives. He looked back at her the whole time. Not the way people look at brides with that soft, overcome expression. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the restaurant, like he was still learning something new. When the priest said they could kiss, she thought he would make it brief and perfunctory. Instead, he put one hand lightly on her jaw, and he leaned in slowly, and he gave her exactly enough time to understand what was happening and decide what she wanted to do about it. She kept her hands at her sides, and she kissed him back, and the room applauded, and she thought about how a life could turn completely sideways in 11 days, and still somehow look completely normal from the outside. The Moretti house. She refused to call it a compound. Even in her head was a 4-story building on the Upper East Side that had been in the family for 2 generations. Sophia had her own floor, her own rooms, her own bathroom, her own sitting room with a window that looked out over the park. There was a housekeeper named Rosa, who appeared the morning after the wedding with coffee and the kind of careful assessing look that said she had seen a great many women come through this house and had developed opinions about all of them. "Good morning," Rosa said. "Good morning," Sophia said. Rosa set down the coffee. "You're a doctor, researcher, medical research." Rosa straightened things on the tray that didn't need straightening. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "The last 3 women Mr. Moretti was involved with were decorative," Rosa said carefully. "You're not decorative." Sophia almost smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment. It is one." Rosa moved toward the door, then stopped. "The men in this house will test you. It's what they do with anything new. Don't let them see you flinch. Mr. Moretti values composure above almost everything else. If they see you flinch, they'll think you're weak. And if they think you're weak, they'll tell him," Sophia said. "They'll use you," Rosa corrected. "Tell him is the least of your worries." She met the men at dinner that first evening. There were 8 of them senior members of what she understood to be the Moretti organization's inner circle, and they treated her with a specific brand of polite hostility that she recognized immediately as the social equivalent of offense. They were too well-mannered to be openly hostile. They were too suspicious to be warm. They smiled at her and asked her pleasant questions and watched every answer she gave like they were looking for something inside it. The most unsettling of them was a man named Vincent, who was Adrian's second, and who had the kind of stillness that suggested he was always thinking about things he would never say out loud. He sat next to her at dinner and made exactly the right amount of small talk and refilled her water glass twice, and by the end of the meal she understood that he didn't trust her in the slightest and was very good at making sure that was completely invisible. "So," Vincent said near the end of the meal, "medical research." "What kind?" "Oncology primarily," she said. "Specifically drug interaction profiles in late-stage cancer patients." "Heavy work," he said. "Most useful things are." He smiled at that, a real one, small and quick there and gone. "Adrian said you were direct," he said. "I hope that's not a problem. In this house." He picked up his wine glass. "It's a survival skill." She looked across the table at Adrian, who was deep in conversation with an older man at the far end. He caught her eye, and for just a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but attention. The particular kind of attention that means you are being seen and not just observed. She looked away first. 3 weeks into the marriage, she learned her first truth about Adrian Moretti. It came from overhearing a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear in a room she'd only entered because she'd heard someone crying and had followed the sound the way you follow sounds that seem like they need to be followed. The someone crying was a teenager, 16, maybe 17, sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets. She looked up when Sophia walked in and immediately tried to pull herself together with the desperate embarrassment of someone who had been taught that being seen crying was a weakness. "I'm sorry," the girl said. "I didn't think anyone. I'm Lucia. I'm Marco's daughter. He's one of the—" "I know who Marco is," Sophia said, which was almost true. She'd heard the name. She crouched down to the girl's level. "What happened?" Lucia wiped her eyes. "My dad's in the hospital. He had the doctors aren't sure. And I didn't know where else to come. I took a car, and I just— Does anyone know you're here?" "I called Mr. Moretti's cell. He said to come." She looked down. "He's in a meeting. He said someone would come get me, but then nobody came and I've just been sitting here." Sophia sat down on this kitchen floor beside her. "Then we'll wait together," she said. They sat there for about 20 minutes before Adrian walked in. He stopped when he saw them both on the floor, and something crossed his face. Surprise again, that same quality she'd noticed in the restaurant, like he was constantly encountering things he hadn't allowed himself to anticipate. He crouched down to Lucia's level. "Hey," he said. "How are you holding up?" "Scared," Lucia said. "I know, your dad's tough." He put a hand briefly on her shoulder. "We're going to take care of you, okay? You're going to stay here tonight, and we're going to get you to the hospital as soon as the doctors say you can see him." Lucia nodded. Her eyes were getting bright again. "You want to go find Rosa," he said. "She'll get you set up with a room. Tell her I said the good one, the one with the window seat." After Lucia was gone, he stood up slowly. Sophia stood too. They looked at each other. She called you, Sophia said. Her father works for me. Of course she called me. Most men in your position wouldn't come themselves. They'd send someone. He looked at her steadily. Most men in my position, he said, aren't standing in their own kitchen having their marriage decisions evaluated by someone who sat on the floor with a crying teenager they'd never met. I heard her crying, Sophia said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said finally. So did I. It was in the 4th week that the first real danger arrived. She had gone to the lab. Adrian had agreed without argument that she would continue her work. The cover story held up perfectly, and she had stayed late reviewing trial data, and she was walking back toward the car that waited for her when she became aware of a second car, parked at an angle, that made it clear it was waiting for her specifically. She didn't run. Running was the one thing you never did, because running told anyone watching that you knew you were afraid, and knowing you were afraid was exactly the kind of information you couldn't afford to give away. She walked to the Moretti car, and she said to the driver, "There's a black car on the corner that's been there since I came out of the building. Don't look at it." The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror and away. "I see it. Who would know I was here tonight? Everyone knows you're here. Your schedule got pulled." He was already on his phone. "Give me 30 seconds, Mrs. Moretti." She sat very still in the back seat and watched the black car without looking like she was watching it, and thought about the envelope under the floorboard, and thought about what it meant that someone had pulled her schedule, and thought about the fact that the danger she'd been trying to avoid for 3 years had apparently decided it was done waiting. Adrian was on the line inside 45 seconds. His voice was controlled, but it had an edge she hadn't heard before. "Are you in the car?" "Yes." "Stay in the car. Don't get out for anything. I'm sending 2 more men to your location right now." A pause. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. Which was true. She was afraid, but being afraid and being fine were not mutually exclusive, and she had learned that a long time ago. "The car on the corner," he said. "Did you get a plate?" "Partial. Last 4 digits, I think 7749. There was a brief charged silence. "You memorized a partial plate." "I noticed the car. Memorizing the plate seemed like a reasonable next step." "Most people." "I'm not most people," she said quietly. Another pause. Something different in his voice when he spoke again. "No," he said. "You're not." Then brisker, "Stay in the car. Someone will be with you in 4 minutes." She stayed in the car. The black car didn't move. The 2 Moretti men arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and the black car was gone inside 60 seconds after that, like it had seen them coming and decided tonight wasn't the right night. When she got home, Adrian was in the front hall. Not sitting, not waiting, standing with his jacket still on, like he'd intended to go somewhere and changed his mind. "You didn't have to wait up," she said. "I wasn't waiting up," he said. "I was going to come get you myself." She stopped. "Why didn't you?" "Because you handled it." He looked at her. "And because you would have been annoyed if I'd shown up like you couldn't." She would have been, she realized. She would have been very annoyed. The fact that he'd understood that without her saying it, without any real reason to know it, landed somewhere inside her chest and didn't quite leave. "The plate," she said. "Did you find anything?" "Working on it." He finally took his jacket off. "There are people inside this situation that I haven't fully identified yet. Tonight was someone sending a message." "What kind of message?" He looked at her directly. "The kind that says they know who you are." The room went very quiet. Sophia held his gaze and thought about everything she hadn't told him yet, all the things still locked in the floorboard and in her memory, and in the 3 years she'd spent becoming invisible, while people who wanted what her father had taken kept getting closer. "Adrian," she said carefully. "Don't," he said, not unkindly. "Whatever it is, I'm not ready to hear it standing in the hallway. Come sit down, have something to eat. The crisis has passed for tonight." He looked at her. "Whatever you're not telling me can wait another hour." She almost told him anyway. The words were right there, the whole truth of it pressing against the back of her teeth. But something in the way he'd said it, patient, steady, without accusation, made her wait. Not because she was afraid of him, because she thought for the first time that he deserved to hear it properly. Not in a hallway, not in the middle of an emergency, not as something she blurted out because the pressure had become too much. He was right. It could wait another hour. She followed him toward the kitchen. Rosa appeared from somewhere with leftover pasta and 2 plates with the particular skill of housekeepers who have learned that the best service is the kind you don't have to ask for. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Not the dining room table, not the formal one. The small kitchen table, where Lucia had sat on the floor and cried 3 weeks ago. The kind of table where things that mattered actually got said. Adrian pushed a plate toward her. She picked up her fork. "You said my plate read was fast," she said. He looked up. "In the car, you seemed surprised." "I was," he said. "It's not something most people do automatically." She turned her fork over in her hand. "My father taught me," she said. "He was before everything he was, someone who paid attention to details like that. He thought it was important. He taught me to notice exits, to count people in a room, to memorize what mattered." She paused. "He was trying to protect me. She stopped. "He made choices that put you in danger instead," Adrian said. "Not cruel, just honest." "Yes." She looked at her plate. "He did." "What happened to him?" Adrian asked. "The real answer, not what you've been telling people." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was very still around them. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. The city made its usual sounds outside. "He found something," she said finally. "Something that was being used against you, against your family. A piece of information that the people inside your organization, the wrong people, had been building for years. And instead of bringing it to you, he panicked. He took what he'd found and he ran because he was afraid that if he came to you, you'd think he was involved." She looked up at him. "And he left me behind to hold what was left of it." Adrian hadn't moved. His face was unreadable. "How much do you know?" he said quietly. "More than I should," she said. "Enough to understand what it means. Enough to understand why someone was watching my lab tonight." The silence stretched between them. She watched him process it, not with anger, not yet, but with the slow, controlled recalibration of a man who had learned to respond to surprises from the inside out, rather than the surface in. "How long?" he said at last. 3 years, she said. "I've known the shape of it for 3 years." His jaw tightened. "And the marriage?" "The marriage was your idea," she said clearly. "I agreed to it because I needed to keep Elena safe, and because I was running out of time to do this alone. I didn't come to you. You came to me. I'm not the person who built this trap. I'm the person who's been standing inside it." He was very still. "The information my father found," she said. "It's real, Adrian. And if the people who want it get to it before you understand what it actually says, you won't just lose your position. You'll lose everything." He looked at her for a long, measured moment. Then he said very quietly, "Where is it?" "Safe," she said. "Somewhere no one has found it in 3 years, because I've made very sure of that." She met his gaze. "I'll give it to you. But not because of the contract. Not because you own 6 months of my life. I'll give it to you because I think you're the only person who might actually know what to do with it." He didn't answer right away. He looked at the table between them, and he looked at his hands, and he looked at her. And then he said the thing she hadn't expected at all. "You've been carrying this alone for 3 years." She blinked. "No one else knew," he said. "Not where it was, not what you had. You've just held it, by yourself." He looked at her like she was something he hadn't encountered before. "Why didn't you use it? You could have gone to the FBI. You could have made a deal. You could have protected yourself without any of this." "Because it would have started a war," she said. "A real one. Not just in your family, across the whole city. People would have died. People who didn't have anything to do with any of this." She kept his gaze. "I'm a researcher. I work in oncology. My entire professional life is about minimizing harm. I wasn't going to set off a bomb just to save myself. Adrian Moretti stared at her across the small kitchen table in his house in the marriage she'd agreed to for 6 months, and she watched him understand something that clearly landed very differently from anything he'd expected. "You've been protecting me," he said, "this whole time." She didn't answer because the answer was obvious, and some things didn't need to be said out loud. The clock in the hallway ticked. The city breathed outside, and the most dangerous man Sophia had ever met sat very still across from a woman he had brought into his life as a temporary solution, and looked at her like she was something that had completely changed the shape of everything. She gave him the location the next morning. Not the envelope itself, not yet. She gave him the address of a storage unit in Queens that she had rented under a name that didn't exist, paid for in cash, visited exactly twice in 3 years. She told him the unit number and the combination, and she watched his face while she did it, looking for the thing that would tell her she had made a mistake. He didn't send anyone immediately. That surprised her. She had expected him to pick up his phone the moment she finished speaking and dispatch 3 men and have the contents of that unit in his hands within the hour. Instead, he sat with the information for a long moment, like he was weighing something that wasn't just tactical. "Come with me," he said. She blinked. "What?" "When I go to get it, come with me." He looked at her steadily. "It's yours. You've been carrying it for 3 years. You should be there when it's opened." She hadn't expected that either. She was starting to realize that Adrian Moretti had a talent for doing exactly the thing she hadn't anticipated, and that this was either going to be very useful or extremely dangerous, and possibly both. They went together, just the two of them, and the driver, no additional security, which she suspected was deliberate, a statement about trust that he was making without labeling it as one. The storage facility was unremarkable. The unit was small and cold, and smelled like cardboard. The envelope was exactly where she'd left it, tucked inside a hollowed-out medical textbook on the second shelf, invisible, unless you knew what you were looking at. She handed it to him. He held it for a moment without opening it. "Your father put this together?" he asked. "He started it," she said. "I finished it." He looked at her. "He sent me pieces before he disappeared," she said. "Photographs, documents, a voice recording. I spent 18 months cross-referencing everything, building the full picture. What's in that envelope isn't just what he found. It's what I figured out from what he found." Adrian opened the envelope slowly. She watched him go through it. Photographs, printed documents, a USB drive, a handwritten list with dates and amounts and names that she had memorized so thoroughly she could have recited it in her sleep. She watched his face change as he read. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for that. But she had spent enough time studying him in the past 4 weeks to read the small signals. The slight tension in his jaw. The way his hand stilled on a particular page. "Renato," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. Renato Conti was Adrian's financial director. Had been for 11 years. Had been, according to everything in that envelope, systematically feeding information about the Moretti organization's operations and vulnerabilities to 3 separate competing families for the past 4 of those 11 years. Not selling them out entirely. Not in a single catastrophic betrayal, but a steady, calculated leak, just enough to weaken, without destroying, just enough to shift power, without triggering a war that would draw federal attention to everyone. It was elegant in a terrible way. Sophia had spent 18 months learning to see it clearly, and it still made her cold when she thought about how long it had been running. "Your father figured this out," Adrian said. "How was doing accounting work for you? A side contract, nothing major. He noticed a discrepancy. Then he started looking closer and—" She paused. "He got scared. Renato found out he was looking. My father panicked and ran before he could bring it to you, and he's been running ever since." "Where is he now?" Adrian's voice was very controlled. Too controlled. "I don't know," she said. "That's the truth. He stopped making contact about 8 months ago. I think he's alive. I think he went somewhere that didn't have a forwarding address." Adrian was quiet for a very long time. He was looking at the list of names and dates. She watched him work through it, the way she'd watched researchers look at data that upended everything they'd built their conclusions on, with a kind of rigid stillness that was really just the mind trying to stay functional while the ground shifted underneath it. 11 years, he said finally. Renato has been with this family for 11 years. 4 of them on someone else's payroll, she said. He closed the envelope. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked at her. You could have gone to my enemies with this, he said. Any of them would have paid significantly for it. I know. Or you could have gone to federal law enforcement, made a deal, gotten yourself and your sister completely out of this situation. I know that too. So why? Because Renato isn't just working against you, she said. He's been feeding information that could eventually be used to dismantle the whole structure, not just the Moretti family. 3 other families. People who work for them. People who have nothing to do with the actual crime and everything to do with the money that feeds their families. She looked at him directly. If this came out the wrong way, it wouldn't just be powerful men losing power. It would be a bloodbath. I wasn't willing to be the person who started that. He held her gaze. And if it comes out the right way, then you handle it internally. You remove Renato quietly. You seal the leaks. And nobody has to die for a war that was engineered by one greedy man who thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. Adrian stood very still in the cold storage unit, holding 3 years of her work in his hands, and she could feel the exact moment that his understanding of her shifted completely. Not warmed, that wasn't the right word for a man like him, not yet, but realigned, recalibrated, like he'd been looking at something through the wrong lens and had just corrected it. You planned this, he said. I planned to be safe, she said. I planned to keep Elena safe. I didn't plan the marriage. She met his eyes. But now that I'm in it, I'm not going to watch you get destroyed by someone in your own house when I have the information to stop it. He said nothing. He put the envelope inside his jacket against his chest, like something that mattered. And then they walked out into the gray morning light, and she thought everything is about to change. She wasn't wrong. The change came faster than she expected, and not in the direction she'd been watching for. Vincent found her 3 days later. She was in the study. She'd started using it in the mornings, because the light was good for reading, and Rosa brought coffee without being asked, and it had started to feel in the quiet way that certain spaces do, like a room she could think in. Vincent knocked, and came in without waiting for an answer, which she was starting to understand was just how he operated, and he sat down across from her with the look of a man who had decided to say something difficult and was going to say it cleanly. The men are talking about you, he said. I assumed they were, she said. Not the way you might think. He leaned forward. 2 weeks ago, the consensus was that you were a liability. A civilian Adrian had attached himself to for reasons nobody fully understood. Decorative at best, dangerous at worst. He paused. That's changed. She set down her coffee. What happened? You noticed the car outside your lab, he said. You got a partial plate. You stayed calm, and you gave us information we could use. He looked at her with the particular directness she'd noticed the first night, the kind that didn't leave much room for social cushioning. In this world, Mrs. Moretti composure in a crisis is worth more than almost any other quality. People saw that. They're reassessing. She absorbed this. Is that why you're here to tell me the men are reassessing? I'm here because Adrian is about to move on Renato Conti, he said. And I need to know how solid the evidence is. Not what Adrian told me, what you know. The air in the room changed slightly. She looked at him steadily. How do you know about Renato? Because Adrian told me, he said. And before you ask, yes, I know it came from you. He was very clear about that. She thought about that for a moment. Adrian had given her credit. Had named her as the source openly to his most trusted lieutenant. That wasn't nothing. In a world where information was currency, that was a significant thing to do. The evidence is solid, she said. 18 months of cross-referencing. Photographs of physical meetings, financial records with the relevant transactions marked. A voice recording that puts Renato explicitly in conversation with someone from the Caruso family about the Moretti dockside operations. She held Vincent's gaze. I'm a researcher. I build cases for a living. I don't build ones I'm not sure of. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your father started this. My father noticed a thread and pulled it, she said. I built the sweater. Something moved in Vincent's expression, appreciation, quick and genuine before he smoothed it away. Adrian needs this to hold, he said. If Renato knows we're moving on him before we have everything in place, he runs to the Carusos, and we have a different kind of problem. I know, she said. That's why I didn't go to the Carusos myself. He stood, looked at her for a moment. You know what the longest-serving member of this organization said about you this morning? She waited. He said, whoever that woman is, she's not what she looks like. Vincent moved toward the door. In this family, that's the closest thing to a compliment a newcomer gets. He left. Sophia sat for a moment in the quiet of the study, with the good morning light and Rose's coffee, and she thought about the fact that she had walked into this house as a 6-month placeholder, and was now somehow the person around whom a very significant internal crisis was quietly organizing itself. She wasn't sure if that was progress or a new kind of danger. She suspected it was both. She learned what real danger felt like 4 days later. She learned it when she came home to find Adrian standing in the middle of the main room with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more controlled than anger. The expression of a man who has received information that has moved the entire board and is still in the act of understanding what the new position means. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Renato knows, he said. He doesn't know the full extent of what we have, but he knows we're looking at him. Someone talked. His eyes were flat and precise. He made contact with the Carusos this morning. We intercepted the communication. A pause. He told them you were the source. The room was very still. He told them I was the source, she repeated. He told them that Adrian Moretti's new wife had brought in evidence that threatened to expose a network of operations that the Carusos have been building for 4 years. He crossed toward her. He told them you were either an FBI informant or a rival agent, and that you needed to be removed before any of this could be contained. The word removed landed with specific, unmistakable weight. He's putting a target on you, she said, to buy himself time. Yes. Adrian stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could read everything in his face, and what she read was not the calculated strategy she'd become accustomed to. It was something she hadn't seen there before. I need you to understand that this situation has changed. The threat against you is no longer theoretical. I know. You're not going back to the lab, not until this is resolved. You're not going, Adrian. She said his name calmly, and he stopped. I know, she said again. I'm not going to argue with you about safety protocols right now. I understand what this means. I need you to tell me what you're doing about Renato. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and walked to the window. We move tonight, he said. Vincent is already in position. We take Renato quietly before he can run, before the Carusos can extract him. He turned back. It will be handled. And the Caruso's people who are looking for me. Also being handled. How many? Enough. She watched him. You're worried, she said. He stopped. Started again. Yes, he said. I'm worried. He said it like someone exercising a muscle they'd let atrophy. I brought you into this. I told you the marriage would be straightforward. 6 months. Nothing that would touch you personally. And now there are people with your name on a list, and that is... He stopped again. Something you didn't plan for, she said. Something I should have. His voice was tighter. I made promises to you. You're handling it, she said. That doesn't... It matters, she said clearly. It matters that you're handling it. Don't dismiss that. She held his gaze. I'm afraid. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. But I knew what I was sitting on when I walked into that restaurant. I knew the risk. I made the choice. She paused. So did you. And now we handle what comes from it. Together. The word hung in the air between them. He looked at her for a very long moment. She had the sense again of that recalibration, something moving inside him that he wasn't quite sure what to do with, something that didn't fit neatly into any of the categories he'd built for how the world worked and what people were to him. Together, he said like he was trying the word out for size. Together, she confirmed. He held her gaze for another beat. Then something settled in his face, not soft, but decided. The particular resolve of a man who has chosen a direction and is done deliberating. "Stay in the house tonight," he said. "Rosa and 2 of my men, they'll be here. I'll be back before morning." "I know," she said. He walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. "Sophia," he said. "Go," she said. "Handle it." A pause. Then he went. The house was very quiet after he left. Rosa appeared at some point with tea and sat with her in the kitchen without speaking, which was the most useful thing anyone had done all evening. The 2 men Adrian had left were stationed at the front and back of the house, visible and professional and entirely unobtrusive about it. Sophia sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea and thought about the way Adrian had said the word together, the way it had sounded like something he hadn't said out loud in a very long time. She was 3 hours into that quiet when her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it for a moment, then picked up. "Ms. Bennett." A man's voice, older, careful. "Or should I say Mrs. Moretti? I suppose that depends on which identity we're treating as real tonight." She kept her voice level. "Who is this?" "My name is Franco Caruso," the voice said. "And I think we should talk before this evening becomes more complicated than it needs to be." Her blood went cold. She kept her hand steady on the phone. She looked at Rosa, who was watching her with absolute stillness. "I'm listening," Sophia said. "My associate Renato has told me some very interesting things about you," Franco Caruso said. "Most of them useful. Some of them I suspect intentionally misleading. I like to draw my own conclusions." A pause. "The evidence you compiled. I want to understand what you plan to do with it." "It's already been handed over," she said. "To Adrian Moretti. Yes, I assumed so. What I'm asking is what you intended to happen as a result." His voice was measured, almost academic. "You had options, Ms. Bennett. You chose to give a very dangerous piece of information to a mafia boss. I'd like to understand why a woman with your background and your obvious intelligence made that particular choice." "Because it was the right one," she said. Silence. Then, "For whom?" "For everyone who would have been caught in the middle of what happens when this goes wrong," she said. "Including probably several people on your side of this conflict who have no idea it's coming." Another silence longer. "Renato told me you were dangerous," Franco Caruso said. "I thought he meant it in the conventional sense. I'm beginning to understand he meant something more specific." A pause. "I want you to know something. The order I gave regarding your removal, I'm rescinding it." She blinked, kept her face neutral, her voice even. "Why?" "Because a woman who had what you had, and could have started a war with it and chose not to, is not someone I have any interest in harming," he said. "And because I am very old and very tired of wars, and anyone who shares that view is someone I prefer to keep alive." He paused once more. "Tell your husband that Franco Caruso would like to speak with him directly, without intermediaries, without Renato." A dry note in his voice. "It appears we have both been poorly served by the same man, and I would prefer to address that." The line went quiet. Sophia sat with the dead phone in her hand and thought about what had just happened, which was that the head of the Caruso family had called her directly to rescind an order to kill her, based on the conclusion that a woman who protected people she didn't have to protect was someone he didn't want dead. Rosa was looking at her. "Was that?" "Get me Adrian's number," Sophia said. "The direct one, not the security line." Rosa had it out before she finished the sentence. Adrian picked up on the second ring. She could hear ambient noise movement, the sounds of a situation in progress. "I told you to stay put," he said immediately. "Franco Caruso just called me," she said. The ambient noise stopped. "He what?" "He called me directly. He's rescinding the removal order." She kept her voice clear and precise, the way she delivered research findings, with everything that mattered in the front of the sentence. "He wants to meet with you, directly, no intermediaries. He says you've both been played by Renato." A very long pause. "He called you directly?" "Yes." "How did he get your number?" "I didn't ask. I suspect a man like Franco Caruso can find most things he decides to look for." She paused. "He also said something interesting. He said a woman who had what I had and didn't use it to start a war is someone he prefers to keep alive." Silence on the line. She could almost feel Adrian thinking through it. "He's making a distinction between you and a threat," Adrian said slowly. "He's making a distinction between me and everyone else who's been sitting on that information and calculating how to use it for personal advantage," she said. "Which means he understood exactly what I chose not to do." "Because you didn't do it for personal advantage." "No," she said. "I didn't." Another pause. Longer. She waited. "Are you all right?" he said. His voice had dropped. It was a different kind of question from the tactical ones before. Not what did he say, and what does it mean? But are you sitting in that kitchen frightened, and are you holding it together? "I'm fine," she said. "Rosa's here. The men you left are outside." She paused. "Come home when you can." She hadn't meant to say it exactly like that. The word home sitting at the end of it unqualified, like she meant it the obvious way. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I will." He hung up. Rosa refilled her tea without being asked. Sophia sat with both hands wrapped around the warm cup and thought about what it meant that she had just told Adrian Moretti to come home and had meant it, and wasn't sure at what specific point in the last 5 weeks that had become the true thing. The men were still outside. The house was still quiet. Somewhere in the city, Adrian was moving toward something that would either resolve this or make it worse, and she was sitting at a kitchen table, trying to understand how a 6-month contract had started to feel in the specific way that truth feels like something that wasn't going to end at 6 months, no matter what either of them had agreed to at a restaurant where the menu didn't have prices. She thought about the way he'd stood in the hallway with his jacket still on, ready to come get her himself. She thought about the way he'd said together, quiet and careful, like he was learning the word's weight. She thought about her father somewhere out there, in a life without a forwarding address, who had run from a danger he should have walked toward and left his daughter to hold what he'd dropped. She thought about Elena, who took the 7:45 bus every morning and knew nothing. She thought about the 6-month countdown and realized she had entirely stopped counting. That she understood was the thing she should probably be most concerned about. The facts of the situation were complicated, but manageable. The evidence was sound. The Caruso complication was moving toward a resolution that nobody had predicted, but that she could work with. Renato would be dealt with. The immediate danger was receding. But the other thing, the thing happening between her and Adrian in kitchens and hallways and cold storage units, and on the phone in the small hours of the morning, that was not something she had a research framework for. That was not something she had planned. And Sophia Bennett was a person who planned. She had been planning since she was 26 years old, and her father had sent her the first cryptic envelope, and she had understood that surviving what came next was going to require more foresight than luck. She had not planned for a man who sat on kitchen floors with crying teenagers. She had not planned for a man who gave her credit openly in front of his lieutenants. She had not planned for a man who heard the word together and sat with it like it was something worth taking seriously. She had not planned any of this. Adrian came home at 4 a.m. She was still in the kitchen. She hadn't meant to wait up, or she'd told herself that, and then hadn't moved from the table. He came in through the back, which she'd learned was his habit when returning late, and stopped when he saw her. "You're awake," he said. "Apparently," she said. He sat down across from her. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the specific exhaustion that comes from spending hours managing human beings in crisis. Not physical tired, but the kind that settled in behind the eyes. "Renato," she said. "Handled," he said. "Not dead," he added, reading her expression. "Removed, contained. He'll face consequences that don't require anyone to disappear." He looked at his hands. "I want that to mean something, that distinction." "It does," she said. "To me it does." He looked up. His eyes were very direct at this hour, with the social armor of the daytime stripped away by exhaustion and whatever the night had required of him. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said. "Running this family, making decisions about who to trust and who to cut loose and what's worth fighting for and what isn't. He paused. I am very good at it. I know, she said. I am very good at it, he said again, and I have never once in 15 years had someone hand me a weapon aimed at my own house and ask for nothing in return. His voice was steady, but not detached. I don't know what to do with that, Sophia. I want to be honest about that. I don't have a category for it. She looked at him across the small kitchen table. The city was very quiet at this hour. The clock on the wall moved. You could just accept it, she said. You don't have to have a category for everything. He was quiet for a long moment. I told Vincent, he said, that the evidence came from you, fully. I made sure every senior person in this organization understood that you identified the threat. You built the case, and you handed it over without asking for anything. She nodded slowly. I know. Vincent told me. I needed them to understand what you did, he said. Not because it protects you, though it does, but because it was the truth and I... He stopped. Something worked in his face that she wasn't used to seeing there. I am very tired of being surrounded by people who think loyalty is performance. You didn't perform anything. You just did the right thing. In this world that's... He shook his head slightly. Rare, she said. I was going to say disorienting, he said. But rare works too. She almost smiled. He saw it. There she is, he said quietly. What? That. He nodded toward her face. You almost smiled. You've been doing that for weeks, getting close and then pulling it back. Like you're not sure you're allowed. She looked at him. The honesty of 4 a.m. was a specific kind, unguarded in a way that daylight didn't permit. I'm not sure it's wise, she said, smiling, in this situation. Nothing about this situation is wise, he said. That hasn't stopped either of us. She held his gaze. The clock moved again. Outside, the city was starting its slow gray drift toward morning. Renato told the Carusos I was an FBI informant, she said. I know. That means there are people in your organization who heard that before it was corrected. People who spent 24 hours thinking you'd married someone working against you. I know that too. How many of them believed it? He looked at her steadily. None of them, he said. Not after the plate, not after the lab, not after Vincent talked to them. He paused. You built credibility here faster than anyone I've ever brought into this house. That's not nothing. She thought about that. About the particular currency of credibility in a world like this, earned not by performance or status, but by the small accumulated evidence of who you actually were when it mattered. I want to meet with Franco Caruso, she said. He went very still. No. Adrian. He called you directly, he said, and his voice had shifted careful and controlled in a way that she was learning to identify as the version of him that was working hard not to say something louder than he meant to. He made contact with my wife without my knowledge in my own house. That is not something I respond to by bringing you to the table. He rescinded the order on me, she said, because he saw a tactical advantage in doing so, or because he's an old man who's tired of wars like he said. She looked at him directly. He distinguished between me and a threat, Adrian. He knew what I could have done with that evidence, and he knew I didn't do it, and he made a decision based on that. If I'm in the room when you talk to him, he understands that you understood the same thing. She paused. It changes the dynamic. He was very quiet. I'm not asking to run the meeting, she said. I'm asking to be there, because my presence says something that words won't, and you know that. The kitchen held its breath. You understand, Adrian said slowly, that when I agreed to this marriage, I thought the most complicated thing about it would be the legal paperwork. I imagine that's true, she said. You have completely and thoroughly destroyed that assumption. I know, she said. He looked at her for a long, considered moment. The particular look she was starting to know, the one that meant he was done deliberating and had landed somewhere new. We meet with Caruso together, he said. My terms, my lead. You're present, but I run it. Agreed, she said. And after this is resolved. He stopped. He seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. He picked up what was left of her tea and looked into it like it held something worth finding. "After this is resolved," she said carefully, "we talk about what comes next." He looked up. "The 6 months," she said. "The contract, what it means now." She held his gaze. "We talk about it honestly." The clock on the wall marked the moment. The city outside was beginning to lighten. Adrian Moretti sat across from her in the kitchen of the house he'd lived in for 15 years, holding her cold teacup, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent his entire adult life inside a world where nothing was ever as simple as it appeared, and who was only now beginning to understand that some things actually were. "Honestly," he said. "Yes," she said, "I think we've earned that." He set down the cup. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. And she sat with the quiet between them, and understood that the 6 months she had been counting down had stopped being a countdown. Somewhere in the past 5 weeks, and had started being something else entirely. Something neither of them had contracted for, and neither of them was in the gray and honest light of this 4 a.m. kitchen, willing to pretend they weren't already inside. The meeting with Franco Caruso happened on a Thursday in a private room above an Italian restaurant in the Bronx that had been operating under 3 different names over the past 40 years and had survived all of them by maintaining a policy of absolute discretion and very good ossobuco. Sophia had dressed carefully. Not to impress, she understood that impression wasn't the point, but to communicate. She wore charcoal gray plain lines, no jewelry, except the ring. She wanted to look like exactly what she was, someone who dealt in facts, who had no interest in theater, and who had chosen this side of the table deliberately. Adrian noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but she caught the look, brief appraising the kind that took in the whole picture and filed it accurately. He had been quieter than usual that morning. Not cold, not distant, just contained in the way that she had come to recognize as his version of preparation. He was building something inside himself before they walked in. She understood that. She did it too. Vincent rode with them. He sat in the front and said nothing, and his silence was the professional kind, not absence but attention, the silence of someone running calculations. "What do we know about who he's bringing?" Sophia asked as they crossed into the Bronx. 2 men, Vincent said. "Both senior. Neither of them armed according to the agreement, though I'd be surprised if that were entirely accurate." "Are we armed?" she asked. A brief pause. "Yes," Adrian said. "Then it's balanced," she said. "Good." Vincent looked at her in the rearview mirror. She caught the look. She was learning to read Vincent's small signals as fluently as she read Adrian's, and the look said something that he would never say aloud, which was, "I understand now why he brought you." The Caruso contingent was already seated when they arrived. Franco Caruso was exactly what she'd expected from the voice on the phone. Late 70s compact, with the patient eyes of someone who had survived by outlasting rather than outfighting. He was dressed simply. His 2 men sat behind him. He stood when they entered, which was a choice she registered and filed away. He looked at Adrian first. Then he looked at her, and he looked at her for a full 5 seconds, which was long enough to be intentional, and he said, "Mrs. Moretti, you're younger than I expected." "You're older than I expected," she said, "though you sound exactly like yourself." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, close to respect. They sat. Adrian opened. He laid out what they knew about Renato, the timeline, the operations compromised the families involved. He presented it the way she'd learned he presented everything that mattered, clean, sequential, without editorializing. He let the facts carry the weight, which meant the facts had to be strong enough to carry it, and they were because she'd built them that way. Franco listened without interrupting. His 2 men listened too. The room was very still. When Adrian finished, Franco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The meeting in March, your dockside contract, the one that fell through." "Renato's work," Adrian said. "Yes." Franco's jaw tightened slightly. "I wondered at the time. It was too convenient. I had nothing to do with it, and I could not understand who in my organization had made contact with yours to collapse it. I spent 4 months looking." He paused. The answer apparently was that no one in my organization had. It was Renato misdirecting both sides. Engineering conflict he could profit from, Adrian said, while keeping both families off balance enough not to look directly at him. Franco set his hands flat on the table. How long did your wife know? The question was directed at Adrian, but Franco's eyes moved to her. Adrian said, she built the case over 18 months. She came into the marriage with the completed picture. Franco looked at her directly. You spent 18 months building a case against a man inside the Moretti organization, and your conclusion was to hand it to Adrian Moretti rather than use it. Yes, she said. Why? Because the goal was to stop the damage, she said, not to win a position. He studied her. Renato told my people you were an FBI plant. Renato told your people whatever would buy him the most time, she said. He had 48 hours between knowing we were closing in and being removed, and he used them to try to start exactly the war he'd been quietly engineering. If I'd been an FBI plant, I'd have had a much simpler path than an arranged marriage. The ghost of something moved across Franco Caruso's face. True, he said. He looked at Adrian. She's sharp. I'm aware, Adrian said, and there was something in the way he said it, quiet, grounded completely without performance, that made Franco look at him with new attention. The question before us, Adrian said, is what Renato's operation has cost both families and how we account for it going forward. What followed was 90 minutes of the most precise, careful negotiation Sofia had ever witnessed. Adrian moved through it with a controlled fluency that she found genuinely extraordinary. He knew when to press and when to give, when to let silence do the work, when to reframe a point that was becoming adversarial before it tipped into something that couldn't be pulled back. She said very little. She had agreed to let him lead, and she kept that agreement. But twice, when a particular point hung in the air unresolved, she said a single sentence, and both times the conversation moved forward. Franco noticed. She could see him noticing. He was the kind of man who tracked everything and what he was tracking. She understood was not just the negotiation, but the two of them, how they operated in relation to each other, whether the dynamic held under pressure, what it said about what this marriage actually was. At the end, when the core agreement had been reached, a mutual acknowledgement of what Renato had done, a framework for addressing the operational damage on both sides, and an understanding that no further action would be taken against Sofia, Franco stood and offered Adrian his hand. Adrian took it. Then Franco turned to Sofia. You prevented a war, he said. Not warmly, he wasn't a warm man, but with a directness that carried its own weight. I don't know if you understand the full scope of what that means. You may never know because what you prevented is precisely the thing that didn't happen. He paused. That's a particular kind of courage. She met his eyes. It's also a particular kind of math, she said. The cost of a war is higher than any temporary advantage. I'm a researcher. I believe in data. He almost smiled then. Really almost. If this world had more researchers, he said, it would be quieter. He nodded once. Good afternoon, Mrs. Moretti. On the way back, the car was quiet for a long time. Then Vincent said from the front seat without turning around. That was the most productive meeting this family has had with the Carusos in 11 years. Adrian said nothing. He was looking out the window. 11 years, Vincent said again, with the mild emphasis of a man making a point he considers important enough to repeat. Sofia looked at the side of Adrian's face. He turned and met her eyes, and what she saw there was not the satisfaction of a successful negotiation. It was something more unsettled than that. Something still working through him. She didn't ask about it then. She knew by now when Adrian needed space to process and when he needed to be pushed. This was the former. The thing that had been working through him came out that night. She was in the study, going through the last of the documents she'd kept copies of, organizing, archiving, making sure everything that needed to be in Adrian's hands was in Adrian's hands when he appeared in the doorway. He didn't knock. He had stopped knocking about 2 weeks ago, and she had stopped noticing the absence of it. I owe you an apology, he said. She set down the papers. What for? He came in and sat across from her. He had changed from the suit into something simpler, and he looked younger than he did in his business armor, and more tired and more present. When you told me about your father, he said, about the evidence, My first reaction, the one I controlled because I'd learned a long time ago to control first reactions, was that you'd been running a play. That you'd come into the marriage with a plan to maneuver me. She waited. That was wrong, he said. And I knew within 24 hours that it was wrong. But I didn't say so, and that's the apology. I should have said so. Why didn't you? He looked at her with the particular honesty of a man who has spent a full day deciding to have this conversation. Because admitting I'd misjudged someone, that completely means admitting I'm capable of misjudging. And I have spent a very long time building a version of myself that doesn't admit that. She was quiet for a moment. That's an honest answer, she said. I'm trying them, he said. Honest answers. They're uncomfortable. They are, she agreed. They're also the only ones worth having. He looked at the papers spread in front of her. Are you still carrying pieces of this things I should have? I'm archiving, she said, making sure the documentation is complete. There's a copy going to a lawyer I trust, not connected to you or to anything in this world, just in case. She met his eyes. I'm not keeping leverage. I want to be clear about that. The copy exists to protect both of us, not to give me an exit strategy. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise this time. Something gentler than surprise. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like relief. You've thought about this more carefully than I have, he said. I've had longer to think about it, she said. I've been inside this situation for 3 years. You've been inside it for 6 weeks. He nodded slowly. Then he said, Tell me about your father. She stilled. What about him? Not the evidence, not what he found. Him. Adrian leaned forward slightly. You've told me what he did wrong. You've told me what he left you with. But you've never told me who he was before all of that. She looked at her hands. Why do you want to know? Because you've spent 3 years carrying his weight and fixing his mistakes, and you talk about it like it's practical, like it's just a problem you've been solving. But no one spends 3 years doing what you did purely for practical reasons. He held her gaze. Who is he to you? The room was very quiet. She hadn't expected that question. She had prepared for many questions, tactical, operational, strategic, and she had not prepared for that one. And it turned out that the one you haven't prepared for is always the one that gets through. He taught me to read plates, she said finally. He taught me to count exits. He taught me to pay attention. She paused. He was before everything the person who taught me that the world was worth understanding, not just surviving, understanding. Her voice was steady. He made bad choices. He panicked when he should have been brave. He left, and he left me holding something that nearly got me killed. She stopped. And I'm still trying to find him, not to fix anything, just to know he's okay. Adrian said nothing for a moment. You love him, he said, not a question. He's my father, she said. Not exactly an answer, but he took it as one because he was a man who understood that some things were too complicated to be reduced to yes or no. We'll find him, he said. She looked up. That's not part of the contract, he said. I know, I'm not saying it because of the contract. He held her gaze. I'm saying it because you've done something that nobody in my life has ever done for me, and I know what it's worth, and I want to give you something back. He paused, and something in that pause was effortful, like a man reaching for a language he hadn't used in a long time. You protected people, your father, Elena. Me, though, you might have framed it as protecting the city from a war, and maybe that's true too. But I was on the list. You protected me when you had no reason to, and I... He stopped. I want to find your father, that's all. She held his gaze for a long time. The clock in the hallway ticked. The city moved outside. Okay, she said softly. He nodded once. Then he said, Elena. What about her? She took the 7:45 bus this morning, he said. I know because I have someone watching her building, not intrusively, just coverage. She stopped at the coffee cart on the corner, and she argued with someone on the phone for about 4 minutes, and she laughed once before she went inside. He paused. I want you to know that she's safe. That I take that seriously. Not as a contract obligation. Just she matters to you. So she matters. Something compressed in Sophia's chest. Not pain exactly. The specific pressure of being seen in a place you'd kept private. "Thank you," she said, and it came out quieter than she intended. He stood. He moved toward the door, then stopped. This had become a pattern between them, him stopping at doors, finding the thing he needed to say in the threshold, rather than from across the room. She had stopped wondering why. She thought maybe he was the kind of man who couldn't be fully still and fully honest at the same time. Motion made it easier. "The contract," he said. She waited. "The 6 months." He was looking at the doorframe. "We're at 7 weeks, roughly." 7 weeks and 2 days, she said. He turned and looked at her. The look was very direct and very unguarded, and it had none of the social management she'd spent 7 weeks learning to see through. "I know what I said," he said. "You'll leave after the wedding. When it's over, you'll be free." He paused. "I meant it when I said it. I want you to know that. I wasn't making a promise I intended to break." "I know," she said. "But I don't." He stopped, started again. "Things are different now. The situation is different. You are—" He stopped again, and she watched him work at something that was clearly difficult. Not because he was afraid of the words, but because he was, she thought, afraid of what the words would require of him once they were out. "Adrian," she said gently. He looked at her. "We said we'd talk about it honestly," she said. "When this was resolved." She paused. "It's not fully resolved yet." He absorbed this. She watched the tension in his jaw soften slightly. A man being given a little more time and understanding that it's being given kindly. "When it's resolved," he agreed. "Yes." He left. She sat with the papers and the quiet and the weight of everything that was still moving between them, unspoken, and she thought about the fact that she had walked into a 6-month contract with the intention of keeping an emotional distance that was at this point so thoroughly broken down that she couldn't have found the pieces to reconstruct it. The second major crisis arrived not from the Carusos, not from Renato's remaining contacts, but from inside the Moretti family itself, and it arrived in the form of a man named Dante. Dante Moretti was Adrian's younger brother by 4 years, and he had been until this week living in Chicago, managing a satellite operation. Sophia had heard his name mentioned in passing. She had formed no particular impression of him because nobody had given her reason to. He arrived unannounced on a Friday evening. She heard his voice from the study, loud, expansive, carrying the specific energy of a man who occupied space as a default. And then Rosa appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had seen this particular situation before and had private opinions about it. "Mr. Dante is here," Rosa said in a tone that communicated without stating that she considered this development neutral at best. Sophia went downstairs. Dante was in the main room with Adrian, and the contrast between them was immediately legible. Where Adrian was contained, Dante was all-surface handsome in a louder way, expansive in his gestures with a warmth that she identified in the first 30 seconds as the kind that was deployed rather than felt. He turned when she came in, and his face went through something quick that she caught because she'd been trained by 3 years of living carefully to catch quick things. He'd expected someone different. "So this is the famous Sophia," he said, crossing toward her with a smile that was genuinely charismatic, and crossing too fast, covering the distance between them at a pace that was meant to set a social tempo she hadn't agreed to. "I've been hearing things." She shook his hand. "All of it true," she said. He laughed, looked at Adrian. "I like her." Adrian's expression was neutral in a way that she had learned to read as watchful. "What brings you to New York, Dante? Can't a man visit his brother?" Dante dropped into a chair and settled into it with the ease of someone who had never been in a room where he wasn't comfortable. "And meet his new sister-in-law. Nobody told me there was a wedding until it was already done." He looked at Sophia. "That hurt my feelings." "It was a small ceremony," she said. "Adrian wanted to keep it quiet." "Adrian wants to keep everything quiet," Dante said, still smiling. "It's his defining characteristic." He looked between them. "You two look good together, I'll give him that." Dinner was Adrian's idea, which she suspected was his way of keeping the situation structured. They ate at the main table, just the 3 of them, and Dante was excellent company in a way that required attention. He was funny. He asked good questions. He listened well enough to make you feel heard. She watched him do it, and she thought this man has spent his entire life being the easier brother, and he is very good at it. And there is something underneath it that I haven't found yet. She found it after dinner. Adrian was pulled away by a call Vincent. She gathered something operational, and she and Dante were left at the table with wine and the tail end of a conversation about the Chicago restaurant scene. And the moment Adrian left the room, Dante's register shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. "You know what I think is interesting," Dante said, and his voice was still pleasant, still warm, but it had a different texture now. "Is that nobody knew Adrian was even considering marriage. And then, boom. 6 weeks ago. No announcement, no introduction, no courtship that anyone witnessed." He turned his wine glass. "You understand why that raises questions." "What kind of questions?" she said. "The practical kind," he said. "This family has a structure. Decisions that affect the family, significant decisions, usually go through a process. Adrian knows that." He looked at her directly. "A marriage is a significant decision." "I'd say it's a personal one," she said. "In this family," Dante said, still pleasant, still smiling, "personal and professional aren't really separate categories. You probably understand that by now." "I understand it very well," she said. "What I'm less clear on is what you're asking me." He set down his glass. "I'm asking who you are, Sophia. Not what Adrian has told people. Who you actually are, and what you actually want, and whether those things are compatible with what this family needs." She looked at him steadily. "That's a conversation you should have with Adrian. I'm having it with you," he said. "Because Adrian is my brother is exceptional at many things. One thing he is not exceptional at is recognizing when someone has found a way past his defenses. He's been operating alone for so long that he doesn't always see it when it happens." "And you think it's happening now," she said. "I think," Dante said carefully, "that you arrived in this house under circumstances that were never fully explained to anyone, and that within 6 weeks, you have been present in a major negotiation with the Carusos. You have been named as the source of evidence that removed a senior member of this organization, and you appear to have Adrian's complete trust." He paused. "That's a very fast climb for someone who was 6 weeks ago a medical researcher from Manhattan." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're worried about him." Dante blinked. She saw it small, involuntary, the surprise of someone who had framed a conversation one way and had it reframed before he could prevent it. "He's my brother," he said. "I know," she said. "And you've been in Chicago while things have been happening here that were significant and dangerous. And you've arrived to find that someone you don't know has become the person he trusts most, and you don't know why or how, and that's frightening." She held his gaze. "I'm not insulted by the question, Dante. I'd ask it too." He was very still. "What I can tell you," she said, "is that I didn't climb anywhere. I was brought in under specific circumstances, and inside those circumstances, I did what I thought was right. I didn't do it to build a position." She paused. "What I can't tell you is that your concerns are wrong. You should be careful about who gets close to Adrian. That's the right instinct. What I'm asking is that you look at the evidence of what's actually happened before you decide what I am." Dante was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his wine glass. He studied her over the rim with the look of someone recalibrating. "What did you do," he said, "before you married my brother?" "Medical research," she said. "Oncology. Drug interaction profiles in late-stage cancer patients." "That's a long way from this world," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." "Why did you agree to the marriage?" She looked at him directly. "Because I had information that was dangerous, and I needed protection for my sister, and Adrian offered both. And because—" She stopped. "And because I thought that even if the marriage was temporary, being honest inside, it was better than performing something it wasn't." He said nothing for a moment. "He's different," Dante said finally quietly. "Since 6 weeks ago. I noticed it in the phone calls, before I came. Something's different." "I can't speak to that," she said. "No," he said. "I suppose you can't." He set down his glass. I'm going to be honest with you because you were honest with me. I came here to assess whether you were a problem. I'm leaving that assessment open." He paused. "But I want you to know that I will be watching. Not because I'm your enemy, because he's my brother." "I understand," she said. "I'd expect nothing less." Adrian came back into the room. He looked between them with the quick assessment of a man who reads rooms for a living, and he said, "Everything all right?" "Getting acquainted," Sophia said. Dante smiled genuinely. This time she thought, or close enough that it didn't matter. "She's all right," he told Adrian. "I'll give you that." Adrian looked at her. She met his eyes. Something passed between them. Not words, not even a fully formed understanding, but the recognition that a thing had happened and been handled, and she had handled it without him and without asking him to. His expression very briefly did the thing it did that she'd started to watch for. The thing that looked like I wasn't prepared for this. And also, I'm glad of it. 3 days after Dante's visit, they found her father. It was Vincent who brought the information, and he brought it to Adrian, and Adrian came to find her himself rather than sending anyone. She was in the kitchen when he walked in, and she knew from the way he moved, purposeful, direct, with a quality of care she'd learned to read in the set of his shoulders, that he had something significant. "We found him," he said. She gripped the counter. "Is he?" "He's alive," Adrian said immediately. "He's in Vermont. Small town, been there about 14 months. He's been working at a hardware store under a name he invented, and he's okay, Sophia. He's not in danger." She exhaled. She hadn't realized how much air she'd been holding. "Does he know?" she said. "That we found him?" "Not yet." He was watching her carefully. "That's your call. How you want to handle that, whether you want to make contact, when that's entirely yours." She nodded. She pressed her hands flat on the counter because they had started to shake slightly, and she didn't want them to. "Hey," Adrian said, and he crossed the kitchen, and he stopped close enough that she could see the particular quality of his attention. Not managing, not tactical, just present. "He's okay. He's safe. That part is done." She nodded again. She was working at keeping her face neutral, which was difficult because the relief was significant, and the complicated tangle underneath the relief, the 3 years of carrying something alone, the fear, the anger, she'd never fully let herself feel. The grief of a father who had left was rising up all at once. "I'm angry at him," she said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her something to keep it that way. "I know," Adrian said. "I've been protecting him for 3 years without his knowledge, and he's been working at a hardware store in Vermont." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "You're allowed to be angry," he said quietly. "I know I'm allowed," she said. "I'm just not—" She stopped again. He did something she didn't expect. He didn't speak. He didn't offer a solution. He just reached out and put one hand over hers, where it rested on the counter, and he left it there, and the warmth of it was so straightforward and uncomplicated that it cut through everything, and she had to look at the window instead of at him. "I want to go see him," she said. "I know." "I want to go alone." A pause. "I understand." She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression, the one without performance, the one she'd started to think of as the true one. "You're not going to argue about security," she said. "I'm going to give you 2 men who will be completely invisible," he said. "You won't see them. You won't know they're there, but they'll be there." He paused. "That's not negotiable. Everything else is." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. He didn't move his hand. She didn't move hers. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah." "The 6 months." She said it quietly. The afternoon was very still around them. "I know we said we'd wait until everything was resolved. I know there are still things to resolve." She paused. "But I want you to know something now before any of that. Before the conversation we said we'd have." He waited. "I stopped counting," she said. "The weeks, the months. I stopped somewhere around week 4, and I haven't started again." She looked at him directly. "I want you to know that because I said I'd be honest, and that's the honest thing." The kitchen held the silence. His hand was still on hers. His eyes were steady on her face, And what she saw in them was not the controlled management of a man who built things for years without showing his hand. It was something simpler and more unguarded than that, and it was the thing she'd been watching for without quite admitting she was watching for it. "I stopped too," he said. "Around week 3. She held his gaze. "That complicates things." "Yes," he said. "It does." "I'm going to Vermont," she said. "I'm going to see my father, and I'm going to be very angry at him, and then I'm probably going to be very relieved, and then I'm going to come back." "Okay," he said. "And when I come back?" "We have the conversation," he said. "Yes." His hand shifted, just slightly, not pulling away, but turning so his fingers rested against her wrist, just above her pulse, and she understood that he could feel her heartbeat, and that he was in the specific language of a man who spoke mostly in action, rather than words telling her that he knew what that heartbeat meant. She didn't pull away. "When you come back," he said quietly, "I'll be here." It was a simple sentence. The kind of sentence that didn't need ornamentation, didn't need context, didn't need anything around it to be completely clear. She absorbed it the way you absorb something true, not in the mind first, but in the chest, in the part of you that recognizes things before you've found the words for them. "I know," she said, and the afternoon held them both in the quiet kitchen of a house that had started in the particular way that places do, when you aren't watching for it to feel less like a 6-month arrangement, and more like the shape of something real, something that had been built piece by piece in storage units and Bronx restaurants, and 4 a.m. kitchens, out of honesty and danger, and the specific courage of 2 people who had both spent too long carrying things alone, and were slowly learning what it meant to set some of it down. She drove to Vermont alone, not entirely alone. Adrian's 2 men were somewhere behind her, invisible the way he'd promised, and she didn't look for them, because she'd decided that looking for them would mean thinking about Adrian, and she needed the 4-hour drive to think about her father instead. She had a playlist she'd made years ago, back when she still made playlists without calculating whether they were safe to feel things to, and she played it loud enough that the music filled the car and left no room for anything to settle that she wasn't ready to settle. She'd called ahead. Not to her father, to a number that Vincent had given her belonging to one of the men who had located him, who had confirmed that her father was still at the address they'd found, still working his Tuesday-Thursday shift at the hardware store on Elm Street, still living in the rented room above the bakery on the same block. The familiarity of that her father, who had once been a man of some complexity and movement, reduced to a hardware store and a room above a bakery on Elm Street, hit her somewhere tender, somewhere she'd been protecting without quite acknowledging it. She pulled off the highway when she was 40 minutes out, and sat in the parking lot of a gas station and let herself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. The relief. The anger. The love underneath the anger that made the anger hurt more than it would have otherwise. The grief of 3 years not mourning him because he'd been alive the whole time, but mourning the version of normal that had ended the day the first envelope arrived. She let herself feel all of it for 5 minutes. Then she pulled back onto the highway. The hardware store was the kind that smelled like wood shavings and machine oil, the kind that had been in the same family for decades and hadn't changed its organizational system since 1987. She stood inside the door for a moment, adjusting to the light, and then she saw him. He was helping a customer in the paint aisle. He looked older. She had expected that 3 years, and they hadn't been easy ones, and she could see it in the way he moved, a little slower, a little more deliberate, like a man who had learned to be careful about where he put his feet. His hair was grayer. He'd grown it out slightly. He looked, she thought, like someone trying very hard to become a different person, and mostly succeeding, and not being entirely sure whether that was an achievement or a loss. He turned and saw her. The color left his face. Not gradually, immediately, completely, like a switch had been thrown. The customer he was helping said something, and her father. She watched him do it, watched him make the choice. He held up one finger to the customer, excused himself, and walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at her like a man who had been expecting a reckoning for 3 years, and had woken up this morning without knowing it was today. "Sophia," he said. "Hi, Dad," she said. His eyes were wet. She had decided on the drive up that she wasn't going to cry, not first, not before she'd said what she came to say, and she held to that decision by focusing on the specific grain of the wooden floor between them. "You should take your break," she said. "I'll wait outside." They sat on a bench in front of the hardware store, and for a full minute, neither of them said anything. A woman walked by with a stroller. A truck rumbled past. Vermont was the kind of quiet that New York never was, a different quality of silence, full of birds and distance, and the absence of urgency. "How long have you known where I was?" he said finally. "Adrian found you," she said. 3 days ago. Adrian Moretti." He said the name carefully. "I heard someone told me you'd married him. I didn't believe it at first. Then He stopped. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said. "Which is more than you made sure of when you left." He flinched. She hadn't intended for it to be gentle, and it wasn't, and she didn't apologize. "I panicked," he said. "I know. Renato was already watching me. I could feel it. I was afraid that if I went to Adrian with what I'd found, Renato would get there first and tell him I was the one who'd been Dad." She said it quietly, but it stopped him. "I know what happened. I spent 18 months building the complete picture. I know every choice you made and the reason you made it." She looked at him directly. "I'm not here because I don't understand. I'm here because I do, and it's still not okay." He looked at his hands. "You finished it," he said. "The case." "Yes." "And you gave it to Adrian." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "That was dangerous." "Very," she said. "You could have been—" "I know what I could have been," she said, and the edge in her voice was real, and she let it be real. "I've known every day for 3 years exactly what I could have been. You left me with that dad. You left me with the peace you'd started, and you left me with Elena, and you left me with the people who were looking for what you'd taken, and you left me to figure out what to do with all of it entirely on my own." He had the dignity not to make excuses for that. She had been half afraid that he would reach for self-justification the way people did when they'd done something they couldn't fully face, and she had underestimated him. Or rather, she had remembered, despite everything, the man who had sat her down at 14 and explained that the truth was always more useful than a comfortable story. "I know," he said. "I know what I left you with." He looked up. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I know that's not enough." "It's not," she said. "But it's a start." They sat in the Vermont quiet. A bird called from somewhere nearby. She thought about the 7:45 bus. She thought about the kitchen at 4 a.m. She thought about a man standing in a hallway with his jacket still on. "Adrian," her father said carefully. "What is he to you?" She thought about how to answer that. "He's—" She paused. "He was supposed to be a contract. 6 months of protection in exchange for the evidence. And now? Now he's the person who found you," she said. "Now he's the person who put his hand over mine in a kitchen and didn't say anything because he understood that sometimes that's the right thing to do." She paused. "He's the person I told to come home at 4 in the morning and meant it." Her father looked at her for a long moment. "He's a dangerous man," he said. "Yes," she said. "His world is." "I know what his world is," she said. "I've been living in it for 9 weeks." She held her father's gaze. "I know who he is. I know what he's built, and what it cost, and what it still costs. And I know that when he thought I might be in danger, his first instinct was to come himself." She paused. "People show you who they are, Dad. You taught me that. I'm applying the lesson." I was quiet for a very long time. "Are you happy?" he asked. And the question was so simple and so sincere that she had to look away. She thought about it honestly. "I'm more myself than I've been in 3 years," she said. "Whether that's the same thing as happy, I'm still finding out." He nodded. He accepted that. "What happens now with the debt?" "With everything my choices started. Adrian closed it," she said. "Your debt is gone. Renato is handled. The Carusos are not allies but no longer enemies." She looked at him. "You can come home if you want to. There's nothing following you anymore." He looked at the street in front of him, at the hardware store, at the life he'd built in a small Vermont town under a name that wasn't his. "I don't know if I know how," he said quietly. Elena wants to see you, Sophia said. She doesn't know the details. She doesn't need to, but she wants her father back. She paused. So do I. We can build something different from what we had before, but you have to come back to build it. He pressed his hands together. His eyes were bright. He nodded once, and then again, and then he said, "Okay," in the voice of a man making a decision that had been postponed for 3 years and was finally painfully ready. She put her arm around him. He put his head down briefly, and she felt him exhale 3 years' worth of held breath, leaving him all at once. They sat on the bench in the Vermont quiet until he had to go back in for a customer, and she drove back to New York, knowing that she had not fixed everything, had not erased everything, had not made the past 3 years not happen. But she had pulled her father back from the place he'd retreated to, and that was the beginning of something, and sometimes the beginning was enough. She got back to the house at just past 9. The lights were on. Rosa had left something in the kitchen that smelled like it had been kept warm. She stood in the front hall and felt the house settle around her, its particular sounds, its particular weight, and understood again that she had stopped experiencing it as temporary somewhere so gradual and so complete that she couldn't have named the exact day. Adrian came out of the study. He looked at her face, and he said nothing, and she said, "He's okay. He's going to come home." Something in his expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but something in the vicinity of it. Something that said, "This mattered, and I'm glad." "Good," he said, simply. "I told him about the debt being closed," she said. He understood. "Does he want to talk to me?" She considered. "Not yet, but eventually." She looked at Adrian directly. "He asked me if you were dangerous." "What did you say?" "Yes." He absorbed this. And I told him what you'd done," she said. "Finding him, handling Renato, closing the debt without conditions." She paused. "He's not stupid. He knows what it means when a man like you does something without attaching conditions." Adrian looked at her steadily. "What does it mean?" "It means you weren't doing it for the contract," she said, "or for leverage, or for any reason that lives inside a transaction." She held his gaze. "It means you were doing it for me." The hallway was very quiet. "Yeah," he said. "I was." They stood there for a moment, the honest silence of two people who had agreed to have a conversation and were both now aware that they were standing at the edge of it. "Do you want to eat first?" he said. She almost laughed. "You're nervous," she said. "I don't get nervous," he said. "You just offered me food to delay a conversation you've been thinking about for 2 weeks," she said. "That's the definition of nervous." He looked at her for a moment. Then very briefly, something moved in his face that was almost a smile, the real kind, not the managed kind, unguarded and genuine. It changed his face entirely when it got through. She'd seen it a handful of times, and each time it had landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. "Come sit down," he said. They sat in the study, not across from each other, beside each other on the same sofa, which was different, and they both knew it was different, and neither of them commented on it. "I want to tell you something first," she said, "before you say whatever you've been preparing." He looked at her. "I came into this marriage afraid," she said. "Not of you, not exactly. Afraid of what it would cost me. I had spent 3 years becoming invisible, and the one thing I knew how to do was protect myself by not letting anything close." She looked at her hands. "I agreed to 6 months because 6 months felt containable, manageable, like I could be present without being present." He waited. "That didn't work," she said. You're not a person who lets things be at a distance when you're actually paying attention. And you pay attention." She looked up at him. "You sat on the kitchen floor with Lucia. You gave me credit in front of your men. You found my father. You put your hand over mine in a kitchen, and you didn't say anything because you understood that sometimes saying nothing is the whole point." She paused. "I was not prepared for any of that." "Neither was I," he said quietly. "I know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at the floor the way she'd seen him do when he was working through something he was going to say only once and wanted to say correctly. "I built this life," he said, on the principle that depending on people was a liability. Every person I let close was a potential point of failure. Every relationship was a transaction, because transactions are clean, and people are complicated, and I had enough complicated without adding more. He paused. I'm not saying that like it's something I'm proud of. I'm saying it because I want you to understand what it looked like from the inside when you walked in and started being you. Me, she said. Honest, he said. Consistent. The same person at the kitchen table at 4 a.m, that you were in the storage unit in Queens, that you were in the meeting with Franco Caruso. He shook his head slightly. Do you know how rare that is? In any world, not just mine, to be genuinely the same person in every room you walk into. She didn't answer because she didn't think it required one. I don't know how to do this, he said. He turned and looked at her directly. I want to be honest about that. I don't know how to be in something that isn't a transaction. I don't have a model for it. I've watched people do it badly my whole life, and I made a decision very young that the things that made people soft were the things that got them destroyed. He paused. I'm not sure that's wrong. I'm just starting to think it's not the whole picture. It's not, she said. You would know, he said, and there was something in it that wasn't quite a joke, but had the rhythm of one self-aware dry warm underneath. Adrian, she said. He looked at her. The contract ends in about 14 weeks, she said. I know what it says. I know what we agreed. You promised I could leave, and I know you meant it, and I know that you are a man who keeps his word. She held his gaze. I'm not going to ask you to renegotiate a contract. That's not the right framework for what I'm trying to say. What are you trying to say? He said. I'm trying to say that I'd like to stay, she said. Not because of the protection, not because of Elena or my father, or any of the practical reasons that were true 9 weeks ago and are less true now. I'd like to stay because this house has started to feel like mine, and because Rosa brings me coffee in the morning without being asked, and because Vincent, who does not warm to people, I have noticed, actually said something kind to me last week and meant it. She paused. And because you're the person I wanted to come home to when I drove back from Vermont, and that's not something I planned, and it's not something I can argue myself out of, and I've tried. I was very still. You tried, he said. For about 3 weeks, she said. I made very sensible arguments to myself about the impracticality of genuine emotional investment in a temporary arrangement. They were good arguments. They didn't work. He turned toward her. He was close enough now that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the real version, undivided, the way he looked when nothing else was running behind his eyes. I'm not good at this, he said. I want to say that clearly. Not as a warning exactly, more as accurate information. I will make mistakes. I will default to control when I'm afraid. I will have moments where I don't say the right thing, because I haven't had enough practice saying the right thing, and I'll need someone who can tell me when I've gotten it wrong without turning it into evidence that I can't do better. I'm a researcher, she said. I believe in correction. I believe in revision. That's how you get from a hypothesis to something true. He looked at her. The real look. The one without management. Stay, he said. Not because of the contract. Not because I'm asking you to. Stay because... He stopped. He tried again. I have spent 15 years in rooms full of people and been the loneliest person in every one of them. And I have spent 9 weeks in rooms with you, and I have not been lonely once. He held her gaze. That's not something I know how to walk away from. She absorbed that. She felt it go in, not with fanfare, not with the rush of something cinematic, but with the quiet, definitive weight of something true, landing in the place it had always been meant to land. I'm not walking away, she said. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, not as a gesture. Just picked it up and held it the way you hold something you've been careful with for a long time and have finally decided to stop being careful about. She turned her hand over and held his back. They sat in the study in the quiet of the house that was no longer temporary, and the city moved outside the windows, and the clock in the hallway marked the hour, and neither of them said anything for a while, because everything that needed to be said had been, and what came after saying it didn't need words. The following week brought the last piece of the crisis. The one she should have anticipated and hadn't, because she'd been so focused on Renato and the Carusos and her father. that she'd missed the thing that had been building quietly in the background since before any of this started. It came in the form of a man named Sal Ferraro, who was 70 years old and had been a senior figure in New York's organized crime infrastructure since before Adrian was born, and who had sent a message requesting a meeting not with Adrian, but with Sophia. Vincent brought her the message himself. He sat across from her in the study, with the look he got when he was deciding how much to say. Ferraro is not someone who requests meetings with peripheral figures, he said. He's not someone who requests meetings at all generally. He makes them happen, or he doesn't. So why is he requesting one with me? She said. Because, Vincent said, you've become something other than a peripheral figure, and Ferraro likes to take the measure of things before they become too significant to measure quietly. He paused. He's not a threat. He's an assessment. Like Dante, she said. More consequential than Dante, Vincent said. Ferraro has relationships across every family in this city. His assessment of you will move through those relationships inside 24 hours of the meeting. He met her eyes. How Adrian's wife is perceived by Ferraro shapes how everyone else in this world thinks about both of you. She understood what he was saying. Does Adrian know? I'm telling you first, Vincent said. Your call. She thought about that. The fact that Vincent had come to her first had given her the decision of how to handle it. Was itself a statement about where he'd landed on the question of who she was and what she was to this family. 3 months ago, she would not have been Vincent's first call. She knew that. Tell Adrian together, she said. I'm not keeping operational information from him, but I want to handle the meeting myself. Vincent almost smiled. I thought you might, he said. Adrian's reaction to the Ferraro request was the most controlled version of alarm she had ever witnessed, which was to say that his expression didn't change at all, and his voice was completely level, and she could feel him working very hard to maintain both of those things. No, he said. Adrian. Ferraro is. Vincent explained who Ferraro is, she said. I understood. She looked at him steadily. I also understood that Ferraro requesting a meeting rather than simply acting is itself meaningful. He's giving us the courtesy of a conversation. That's worth something. You don't know him, Adrian said. I didn't know Franco Caruso either, she said. You sat across the table from him with me. That was different. How? He looked at her. His jaw was tight. Caruso was negotiation. Ferraro is someone who has been in this city longer than either of us, and who has a specific interest in who sits at what table and why, and who is not above using a meeting as an opportunity for something other than conversation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you trust me to handle it? He looked at her for a long time. She watched him fight himself the part that said, Protect her, and the part that said she has earned this, and the part that said you cannot spend the rest of your life making decisions for a woman who figured out something you didn't in 18 months and a storage unit in Queens. Yes, he said. God help me, yes. Then let me handle it, she said. I'll tell you everything the moment I'm done. Nothing hidden, nothing edited. You'll have the full account. He pressed his hands flat on the desk. If anything feels wrong, I walk out, she said. You know me well enough to know I'm not going to sit in a room where something feels wrong to prove a point. He nodded once, tightly. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. It makes me feel better about something I'm not sure I should be feeling good about. She almost smiled. That's very honest. I'm trying them, he said. And for just a moment in the middle of the tension, she heard the echo of the conversation they'd had weeks ago in this same room, and the corner of his mouth moved. And she thought, this is what it looks like. Not the romance of it, not the drama of it, but the actual fabric of it. Two people who have started to speak the same language without deciding to. Sal Ferraro was a small man with enormous presence, the kind that came from spending 7 decades being the most dangerous person in every room without ever needing to demonstrate it. He had chosen a restaurant she'd never been to, Quiet Family, run the kind where the owner came to the table himself, and the menus were handwritten. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood when he saw her, and the gesture had a quality of formality that was entirely genuine. Mrs. Moretti, he said, thank you for coming. Thank you for the courtesy of asking, she said. They sat. He looked at her the way Franco Caruso had looked at her, but without Franco Caruso's underlying wariness. Ferraro's look was simply curious, old, unhurried curiosity. You know why I wanted to meet, he said. You want to understand what I am, she said. What I represent. Whether what's happened in the past 9 weeks is an anomaly or a pattern. He nodded slowly. You've been described to me in several ways, he said. By several people who don't usually agree on anything. He folded his hands. The descriptions are consistent in one way. Everyone says you're not what they expected. I'll take that, she said. You should. He studied her. Renato's removal, the Caruso meeting, your father's situation. He paused. You were at the center of all three, but not in the way that people who want power are at the center of things. You were there because things kept needing someone to hold them together. I'm a researcher, she said. I look for what's true, and I figure out what to do with it. That's a useful quality, he said. In any world. He picked up his water glass. Adrian Moretti has been running this family for 15 years. He's built it into something significant. He's also been running it entirely alone for 15 years, which is not sustainable. No, she agreed. A man like Adrian, Ferraro said, needs someone who is not afraid of him, who is not bought by him, who is not performing loyalty for the sake of position. He looked at her. Those people are almost impossible to find. And when you find one, you don't let them go. She was quiet for a moment. Is that your assessment? She said. That he shouldn't let me go. My assessment, Ferraro said, is that what happened in this city over the past 9 weeks, the resolution of the Renato situation, the agreement with the Carusos, the stability that's followed, is the best outcome anyone in this city could have hoped for, and it happened largely because you were in the room. He set down his glass. I wanted to meet the woman responsible for that. I wanted to understand whether she understood the weight of it. I think I'm beginning to, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once with the finality of a man who has reached a conclusion and has no need to elaborate on it. Good, he said. That's good. He picked up the menu. Now, can you eat because the food here is exceptional, and I am very old, and I refuse to have serious conversations without exceptional food. She picked up her menu. She thought about Adrian sitting in the house right now, working very hard at not watching the clock. And she thought about how she would describe this moment to him later. The absurdity of it, the strange normalcy, the way Sal Ferraro had looked at her like she was something he recognized and had been waiting to name. What do you recommend? She said. Ferraro's eyes lit up in the way of people who take food seriously. Everything, he said. But start with the gnocchi. She stayed for an hour and a half. She ate the gnocchi, which was in fact extraordinary. She talked with Sal Ferraro about his grandchildren, and about the neighborhood she'd grown up in, and about the particular challenges of maintaining an oncology research career while navigating the social demands of a world that had very little overlap with a lab in Manhattan. He listened to all of it. He told her about his late wife 33 years gone 6 years ago, and she listened to that. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the door. You'll tell Adrian, he said, that the meeting was satisfactory. That's all. He almost smiled. He'll understand what it means, he said. Satisfactory from me after a first meeting he'll know. She understood, she thought, when she walked out onto the sidewalk and exhaled into the cool evening. Satisfactory from a man like Ferraro, after what had happened in the past 9 weeks, wasn't qualified approval. It was the thing she had been trying to build for 9 weeks without quite knowing she was building it, legitimacy. Not borrowed from Adrian, not contingent on the contract, not dependent on any single act or decision, but hers. Earned. Real. She called Adrian from the car. He picked up before the first ring had finished. Well, he said. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. Ferraro says the meeting was satisfactory, she said. A pause. Satisfactory. His word. A longer pause. Sophia. His voice had changed. Something in it she couldn't quite name. I know, she said. I'll tell you everything when I get home. Home, again. Still the right word. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm good," she said. "I'm really good." She paused. "He has excellent taste in gnocchi." She heard him exhale, not quite a laugh, but close. The particular sound of tension, leaving a person who had been holding it for 2 hours. "I'll tell Rosa to make it tomorrow," he said. "Don't tell Rosa. She'll take it as a challenge." "She'll take it as a compliment," he said. "There's a difference." She was smiling. She could feel it, the kind that didn't get pulled back, the kind she'd been withholding for 9 weeks, for reasons that had gradually dissolved, the kind that was simply what happened when you were exactly where you meant to be. "I'm coming home," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll be here." She drove back through the city, her city, the one she'd hidden in for 3 years and had stopped hiding in somewhere around week 4 of a 6-month contract, and she thought about the last 9 weeks and all the things that had required courage. She hadn't known she had, and she thought about what came next, which was no longer a countdown, but an opening. And she thought about a man who had told her he hadn't been lonely once in 9 weeks, and had said it like a man who finally understood the difference between being alive and just continuing. She thought about freedom, the kind she'd been promised at the start, the kind that meant walking away, and the different kind she'd found instead. The kind that didn't look like leaving. The kind that looked like a kitchen table, and an honest conversation, and a man standing in a hallway with his coat still on, ready to come get her himself. She had walked into a contract. She was driving home to a life, and that she understood now was the only kind of freedom that had ever been worth having. Not the freedom to go anywhere, but the freedom to know where you wanted to be. The 6-month mark came on a Wednesday. Sophia knew it the moment she opened her eyes that morning. Not because she'd been counting, she'd told him the truth about stopping, but because the body keeps its own calendar, and hers had registered the date with a quiet, distinct clarity that felt less like an alarm and more like a door swinging open onto something she hadn't fully seen yet. She lay still for a moment and listened to the house. Rosa was already in the kitchen. She could hear it, the particular rhythm of someone who knew a space completely. The way cabinets opened and closed with the confidence of long familiarity. Somewhere on the floor below, a phone rang once and stopped. The city was doing what it always did at 7 in the morning, that specific mixture of urgency and indifference that had once made her feel like one more invisible person moving through it, and now felt improbably like home. She got up. She didn't think about what the date meant in contractual terms, because it no longer meant anything in contractual terms, and hadn't for some time. What she thought about pulling on clothes in the gray morning light was that she had a 9 o'clock call with her lab director. She'd returned to the research 2 months ago on a modified schedule, under conditions that Adrian had negotiated with a seriousness that had startled Dr. Reeves considerably, and that Elena was coming for dinner on Thursday the 3rd, Thursday in a row, and that her father was arriving from Vermont on Saturday for a weekend that she was simultaneously dreading and needing the way you need things that are going to hurt and matter in equal measure. She went downstairs. Rosa looked up from the coffee she was already pouring. "Wednesday," Rosa said. Sophia looked at her. "What about it?" 6 months, Rosa said with the directness of a woman who had been in this house long enough to say true things without preamble. "We're past that now," Sophia said. Rosa put the coffee on the table in front of her. "I know," she said. "I'm noting it." She sat down across from her, which she did occasionally when the house was quiet and the morning allowed it, and she said, "He was different before you." "Different how?" Rosa considered. "Quieter," she said. "Not the good kind of quiet. The kind that means a person has stopped expecting anything." She folded her hands. "I've worked in this house for 9 years. I have seen that man handle things that would break most people, and I have never once seen him look the way he looks now." "How does he look now?" Sophia asked. Rosa picked up her own coffee. "Like someone who came in from a very long time in the cold," she said, and finally stopped pretending it wasn't cold. Sophia sat with that for a moment. "He told you to say that," she said. "He absolutely did not tell you to say that." Rosa's expression was serene. "I have eyes." Adrian found her in the study an hour later. She was reviewing trial data, real work, the kind she'd missed during the worst of the crisis months. the kind that required a particular quality of focused attention that had always felt to her like the mental equivalent of coming up for air. He came in, and he stood there for a moment, and she looked up. "Wednesday," he said. "Rosa already gave me the Wednesday speech," she said. "I didn't ask Rosa to say anything. I know, I was teasing." She set down the papers. "Sit down." He sat across from her. He had that look, the prepared one, the one he got when he'd decided to say something and was organized about it. She'd learned to recognize it as its own form of vulnerability, the care he took with important things. "I had something drafted," he said. "What I was going to say, I worked on it." "You drafted something?" "In my head. Don't look at me like that." "I'm not looking at you like anything," she said, though she was a little. "I had an argument," he said. "A good one. For why the next step should be for what I was going to propose." He stopped. "And then this morning, I thought about how you'd react to a prepared argument for something like this, and I threw it out." She waited. "I don't have the contract anymore," he said. "Legally, as of today, you are free to walk out of this house, and I have no claim on your presence here. That's what we agreed." He looked at her directly. "I want you to know that I honor that, completely. Whatever you decide today, I honor it." "I know," she said. "And I also want you to know," he said, "that I would very much like you to stay. Not in the way I said it 9 weeks ago, because 9 weeks ago I still thought of it as I still thought there was a version where this made sense as an arrangement, where you being here served a function." He shook his head slightly. "That's not what I'm asking now." "What are you asking?" He looked at her with the expression she had learned to love most, the unmanaged one, the one that had no strategy behind it. Just a man who had spent 15 years keeping his own counsel and had chosen against everything he'd built himself to be to let one person past it. "I'm asking you to be my wife," he said. "Not in the contract sense, in the real sense, the one where it's a decision we both make every day, not a term we agreed to." He paused. "I'm asking because you are the only person in my life who has made me feel like a human being, and a better one at that. Not because I performed it, but because you made it seem worth being. And I am—" He stopped. Tried again. "I am not easy. I know that. I default to control. I go quiet when I should talk. I have a whole world attached to me that is complicated and will always be complicated, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He held her gaze. "But I will spend however long you give me making sure you never regret staying. That's not a promise I make lightly. I don't make promises lightly." The study was very still. The clock in the hallway ticked. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And she thought about the man she'd sat across from at a restaurant where the menus had no prices. The man who had made her a practical offer with a practical rationale and had managed entirely accidentally to also be the man on the kitchen floor with a crying teenager. The man who found her father. The man at 4 a.m. who had said together, like it was a word he was learning the true weight of for the first time. "I already decided," she said. He went very still. "I decided somewhere around week 4, she said. "I've just been waiting for the contract to expire so I could say it without it sounding like I was honoring an obligation." She met his eyes. "I'm staying. Not because of the house or because of Elena's dinners, or because Rosa makes extraordinary coffee. I'm staying because you are the person I want to talk to about everything, the work and the fear and the complicated and the ordinary. And that's not something I've had before. And I know what it's worth." She paused. "Yes. My answer is yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face, not the managed expressions she'd spent months cataloging, but something underneath all of them, something that had been there the whole time, patient and certain waiting. "Okay," he said, quietly. "Okay." They sat in the study with the morning happening around them, and it was entirely ordinary and entirely extraordinary in the specific way that things are when they are simply true. What happened next was not a single dramatic turning point, but something more real than that, a series of days that accumulated into a life. Elena came to dinner Thursday, and then the Thursday after that, and slowly she stopped being a guest and started being someone who knew which drawer had the good serving spoons and who made Rosa laugh in the kitchen. She figured out across 3 dinners that there was more to Sophia's marriage than she had been told, and to her considerable credit, she asked one direct question. "Is this real?" and accepted Sophia's answer, "More real than anything I planned," with the grace of someone who understood that the full story would come eventually, and that trust was worth more than detail. Her father arrived Saturday. He looked better than he had in Vermont, less contracted into himself, less like a man waiting for a consequence. He shook Adrian's hand in the front hall, and there was a charged moment where nobody said anything, and then Adrian said, "Your daughter put in work to fix what you left behind. She did it better than most people would have. You should know that." And her father said, "I know. I'm trying to deserve it." And Adrian said, "Good." And that was somehow enough to start. Dinner was complicated and full of silences that had weight and the occasional sentence that meant 3 things at once. And by the end of it, her father had helped Rosa clear the table without being asked. And Adrian had told a story about an entirely separate disastrous situation from 3 years ago that had nothing to do with any of them, and had made her father laugh, a real laugh, unprepared and unguarded. And Sophia had sat at the kitchen table and thought, "This is the thing I couldn't plan for, and it's the only part that matters." Her father went back to Vermont on Sunday. He was not ready for New York yet, and she respected that. But he called her on Tuesday, and he called again on Friday, and slowly the calls became the kind they'd had before long, meandering full of the comfortable shorthand of people who share a history and have decided to stop being careful about it. The crisis that came in November arrived without warning the way the real ones always did. It was Vincent who brought it to her first, which still meant something she had not stopped noticing that. He found her in the study on a Thursday afternoon, and his expression was the specific version of controlled that she'd learned to read as "This is significant, and I need you to be steady." "There's a situation," he said. "Tell me." "A man named Carver," he said. "Federal. He's been building a case not against the family specifically, against the Ferraro network." He sat across from her. "We became aware of it 2 weeks ago. Adrian has been managing the exposure. What we didn't know until this morning is that Carver has a witness." She waited. "The witness is someone who was inside the Renato situation," Vincent said. "Someone who was peripheral, not directly involved, but present for conversations that Renato had that touched on Moretti operations." He paused. "The witness has been offered a deal." "Who is it?" she said. Vincent looked at her steadily. "Marco," he said. "Lucia's father." The name landed like a stone in still water. She thought about Lucia on the kitchen floor, crying with the particular desperation of a teenager who has run out of places to feel afraid. She thought about Adrian crouching down to her level and saying, "Hey." She thought about Marco, who had worked for this family for years, whose daughter had called Adrian's personal cell in a crisis because she knew he would come. "Does Adrian know?" she said. "He found out 20 minutes ago," Vincent said. He's handling it, but I wanted to come to you first because—" He stopped. This was unusual for Vincent, who did not stop mid-sentence. "Because the decision about how to handle Marco is going to require a kind of thinking that Adrian is angry. When Adrian is angry, he is still excellent at strategy, but he defaults to the harder version of everything." She understood what Vincent was asking. Not in so many words, but completely. She found Adrian in his office. He was standing at the window, which she'd learned was what he did when he needed to pace, and had decided not to. He stood very still in a specific way that was just controlled, pacing the energy of it, compressed into stillness. "Vincent told me," she said. "I know he did." His voice was level. Too level the way a surface is level when something is pulling very hard at it from underneath. "Are you going to let me say something before you've decided?" He turned. His face was controlled. "I've been thinking about Marco for 11 years, he said. "He's been with this family. I brought his daughter here when she was 7 years old. I paid for her school. He sat at this table." The control in his voice was a thin wall over something that had real heat behind it. "I trusted him." "I know," she said. "He had options," Adrian said. "If he was in trouble, if Carver had approached him, if he felt pressured, he had options. He could have come to me." "He was scared," she said. "The same way my father was scared." The room went very quiet. She watched him take that in. She watched it move through him, the parallel. He hadn't let himself draw the comparison that was structurally identical and emotionally entirely different, because it was personal in a way that made it harder to be fair. "That's not," he started. "It's not the same," she said. "I know it's not the same. Marco had more options than my father did, and he's been in this world long enough to know how to use them. I'm not excusing what he did." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you to think about Lucia before you decide what happens next." His jaw tightened. "I'm not asking you to be soft," she said. "I'm asking you to be precise. There's a difference. Marco made a choice to protect himself that puts this family at risk. That's real, and it has to be addressed." She paused. "But Lucia is 17 years old, and she called your cell phone when her father was in the hospital, and she sat on this kitchen floor because she didn't know where else to go." She kept her voice steady. "Whatever you do to Marco becomes the thing she lives with forever. I need you to know that before you decide." Adrian stood at the window. The city moved outside him, indifferent and continuous. Then he said, "What do you think the right move is?" She had been prepared for many reactions. That one landed differently. Not because he'd never asked her opinion. He had regularly for months. But because he asked it now when he was angry, when every instinct he'd spent 15 years sharpening was pulling him toward a particular response, and he was choosing to ask instead. "I think Marco needs to understand," she said carefully, "that the deal he's been offered is worse than what he'd get from telling you the full truth right now. I think if you give him the chance to come in, genuinely come in with everything. No performance, and if you handle it as an intelligence problem rather than a loyalty problem, you end up with the information Carver already has, plus everything Marco knows about Carver's case." She paused. "Which means you stay ahead of it. Which means Lucia doesn't end up with a father in a federal case and a family that's been burned as collateral." He looked at her for a long moment. "You'd have made a good strategist," he said. "I'm a researcher," she said. "Same skill set, different material." Something shifted in his expression. The heat behind the control found a different direction, not gone, but redirected, which was a different thing. "If I bring Marco in," he said, "and he's not fully honest, if he gives me a partial version hedged, then you'll know," she said. "You know how to read people. You've been doing it for 15 years. She held his gaze. "Give him the chance to do the right thing. If he doesn't take it, you'll make a different decision, and you'll be right to." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened. The decision had landed. She could see it settle into him, the particular composure of a man who has chosen a direction and is organized around it. "Vincent," he said to the air, because he knew Vincent was just outside the door, which was a thing she had noticed they both always knew. Vincent appeared. "Sir?" "Bring Marco in," Adrian said. Quietly. "Tell him it's a conversation, not a consequence." He paused. "Make sure it's true when you say it." Vincent looked at him, then at Sophia. Something moved in his eyes that wasn't quite visible enough to name. "Yes, sir," he said. After he left, Adrian looked at her. "You know this might not go the way you're thinking." "I know," she said. "Marco might not take the opening." "He might not," she agreed. "But then at least you'll know you gave it to him. And Lucia will know eventually that the decision her father made was his own." She met his eyes. "You can't control what he does with the chance. You can only control whether you gave him one." He held her gaze. "When did you get so certain about things?" he said. "I've always been certain about things," she said. "I've just had a better context for applying it lately." The corner of his mouth moved. There it was, the real one, the unguarded one. "Come here," he said. She crossed the room to him. He put his hand on the side of her face, the same gesture as the wedding, the same patience in it, the same quality of giving her time to understand what was happening and decide what she wanted to do, and she put her hand over his and held it there. "Thank you," he said, quietly, directly. "For what specifically?" "For making me slow down when I needed to," he said. "For making me think about Lucia when I was thinking about Marco. For being the person who stands in this room and says the true thing when I'm working hard to avoid it." He looked at her. "I knew I needed someone I couldn't control. I didn't know I needed someone who made me want to be better than I was. Those are different things. She looked at him. Yes, she said. They are. Marco came in that evening. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Sophia wasn't in the room. She'd been clear with Adrian that it wasn't her place to be, and he'd accepted that without argument, but she knew it was going well. Somewhere in the second hour, when Vincent appeared in the kitchen with the look of a man who has witnessed something he hadn't fully believed was possible. He's talking, Vincent said. He sat down at the kitchen table. Rosa put coffee in front of him without being asked. Everything. The full picture of what Carver has, how the approach was made, what he's already said and when. He shook his head slightly. Adrian gave him 30 seconds to decide, and he started talking in 15. He was relieved, Sophia said. Vincent looked at her. He's been carrying it, she said. The same way my father carried it. Scared, isolated, no clear path forward. Adrian gave him a door that wasn't a trap, and he walked through it because he'd been looking for one. She paused. That's not weakness. That's just what people do when they've been afraid long enough. Vincent was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, when you first came to this house I spent 2 weeks trying to figure out what your angle was. I know, she said. You were right to. I couldn't find one, he said. That's because there wasn't one, she said. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her with the directness she'd come to understand was his version of warmth. Not softness, not sentiment, but the particular respect of a man who did not give it lightly. This family is better than it was a year ago, he said. Not because of one decision or one negotiation. Because of the way things get decided now. The way the room sounds when a problem comes in. He paused. That's your doing. Not entirely, but significantly. She held his gaze. It's everyone's doing, she said. Including yours. You came to me first on the Ferraro request. You came to me first today. That's not nothing, Vincent. He almost smiled. Don't make it sentimental, he said. I wouldn't dare, she said. 3 weeks after the Marco situation resolved cleanly, completely, with the federal case dismantled before it could reach anyone with a surname that mattered, Dante called from Chicago. She answered because Adrian was in a meeting, and she'd started answering his phone when she was near it, and it seemed relevant, which was its own kind of statement about where they'd arrived. Sophia, Dante said. Dante, I heard about Marco, he said. I heard how it was handled. Good news travels, she said. In this world, it doesn't usually, he said. Which means something. A pause. She heard him make a small decision. I came to that house in October to figure out if you were a problem, he said. I want you to know that I was wrong to frame it that way. You were protecting your brother, she said. I told you at the time I'd have done the same. I know you did. I've been thinking about it since. He paused again. He sounds different on the phone. He's sounded different for months. I want you to know that it matters. To me. What you've done for him. His voice was gruff in the way of men who have decided to say something sincere and are not entirely comfortable with it. He's my brother. He's been alone in that house for too long. I don't know what you did, but I didn't do anything, she said. He did it. I gave him something honest to respond to. A long pause. Yeah, Dante said. That's yeah. He cleared his throat. Merry Christmas, Sophia. Early. Whenever it comes. Merry Christmas, Dante. Christmas came quietly. Her father was there. Elena was there, and Elena's boyfriend, who had no idea what he'd walked into, and navigated the evening with the admirable flexibility of someone who had decided that confusion was no reason to be impolite. Dante came down from Chicago on the 26th, and ate 3 plates of whatever Rosa made, and told terrible jokes until even Vincent, who was there for approximately 45 minutes, under the pretense of dropping off something operational, was cornered into something that resembled reluctant laughter. That night, after everyone had gone, and the house was quiet, and the only light was from the kitchen where Rosa had left the under-cabinet lights on. Out of habit, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, and Adrian sat across from her, and they drank the last of a bottle of wine that someone had brought and hadn't finished. My father laughed today, she said. 3 separate times. I counted. I counted 4, Adrian said. The third one when Dante knocked over the candle doesn't get its own entry because Dante knocked it over on purpose. Did he? He absolutely did. He was losing the argument about the restaurant in Chicago, and he needed an exit. She smiled, the real one all the way. She'd stopped counting how often she let it through. Dante is more like you than either of you wants to admit, she said. Don't tell him that, Adrian said. He'll be insufferable. He already is. It's his best quality. He leaned back. He looked at her with the unhurried attention that she had come to think of as one of the things she loved most about him, the quality of his presence, the way he was entirely in the room when he was in it. I want to show you something, he said. He got up and went to the drawer in the kitchen. The third one which held various things that didn't have a better home, and he came back with something small and held it across the table. It was a key. She looked at it. What's this for? The storage unit in Queens, he said. I had it copied. Original is in the safe. He paused. I want you to have a copy. Not because you need access to anything operational, because the things in that unit, the work you did, the 18 months you spent building something true out of what your father left, those are yours. They should always be accessible to you. He held her gaze. I don't want there to be anything in this house that you need to ask my permission to reach. She looked at the key. Such a small thing. Such a precise and specific thing, chosen with an understanding of what it would mean to her. She picked it up. You thought about this, she said. For about 2 weeks, he said. She looked at him. You are better at this than you think you are, she said. I have a good teacher, he said. She held the key in her palm and thought about the woman who had rented that unit in Queens 3 years ago, alone, afraid, invisible on purpose, holding something dangerous and carrying it with the specific, careful endurance of a person who has no one to put it down with. She thought about what it had cost to carry it alone. She thought about what it felt like to put it down. Adrian, she said. Yeah, I love you. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, directly, without performance, without softening it into something easier to receive. I want you to know that. Not in the context of anything else, just that. He was very still for a moment. I know, he said. His voice was quiet. I've known for a while. I know you know, she said. I'm saying it out loud. He reached across the table and took her hand. His eyes were very steady on her face, and what she saw in them was everything the past year had built: the storage unit, and the Bronx restaurant, and the 4 a.m. kitchen, and Vermont, and Sal Ferraro's gnocchi, and Marco, and a key for a drawer that was hers. All of it held in the look of a man who had learned against everything he'd built himself to be what it meant to let something matter. I love you, he said. I've known for months what it was. I didn't know if I was allowed to name it. You're allowed, she said. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to understand that. The kitchen was quiet. The city moved outside. Rosa's under-cabinet light made the room warm and specific. Her father was asleep upstairs in the good room, the one with the window seat. Elena had texted from the car 20 minutes ago to say thank you. It was perfect. Her boyfriend was confused, but very happy. Dante was at a hotel 6 blocks away and would appear tomorrow morning for Rosa's coffee without calling first, because that was who Dante was. She held Adrian's hand across the small kitchen table, and she thought about the night she had agreed to 6 months in a restaurant where the menu had no prices, and the promise he had made her. Then you'll leave after the wedding. When this is over, you'll be free, and how completely wrong he had been about what freedom would turn out to look like. Not the freedom of walking away. Not the freedom of a clean exit and a life with no complications and no risk, and no one who could reach the places she kept protected. The freedom of being known. The freedom of a key for a drawer. The freedom of a man who asked what she thought when he was angry, who found her father, who sat on floors with crying teenagers, who said I love you. Like it was the most considered thing he'd ever said, because it was. She had walked into a contract thinking she was protecting herself. She had built a life instead. And the man who had promised she would leave, who had made that promise honestly, who had meant every word of it, had become the man who sat across from her in a kitchen that was theirs, in a life they had made without planning it, holding her hand like something he had no intention of letting go. He had promised she would be free. He had kept that promise in the only way that mattered. And Sophia Bennett, who had spent 3 years being invisible, who had carried impossible things alone, who had walked into the most dangerous room of her life and chosen honesty over safety and truth over strategy, looked at the man across from her and understood with the full clarity of someone who had earned every piece of it that she was exactly completely fine.